Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the session on the Immigrant Voices. And it's lovely to join you all here today for this discussion. So, just so that we can give some context and some background to the audience, to the lovely audience that we have with us, it would be lovely to sort of speak about the places where you've been, and just about yourselves, and what were you reading, what were you writing, and how it started, and how things have evolved as a starting point.
So, hello everybody. My name is Onyi Nwabineli. I am, as mentioned, a Nigerian British author. I love travel and I love absorbing and learning about the cultures of all the places that I've been. I've been influenced greatly by many Nigerian, specifically Igbo authors. Obviously, the most prominent and well-known of which is the late Chinua Achebe, who wrote Things Fall Apart and A Thing Around Your Neck. Those are both some of my most beloved literature as well. I've also been influenced by other great writers such as Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And I try to make sure that at the core of my work is my heritage, specifically Igbo heritage, and that is a common thread and a common vein throughout everything that I produce. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Luna Montenegro, and I'm a half of a collective called Montenegro Fisher. I'm from Chile. It's been very amazing to be in Kerala. We are in a project which is like kind of UK-India project, and we came here for kind of a while to look at the environmental issues. And we have been here for a little while, but I was so surprised to meet so many Malayalam poets that knew so much about Chile. I felt kind of close, because we have also like a similar geography. So we have the mountain and the sea, and we're this line in between. So it's kind of like a very close thing. So I'm from Chile, and then I moved to the UK, which is actually my home now. I never expected to live in the UK. I visited it before with my rucksack, and I hated it. It was so cold and grey, and it looked terrible. But actually, I fell in love with the man from the UK, and I ended up living there. And writing, I've been writing from very little, but also mixing it with art and different things. And when I was about 7, my grandmother gave me an encyclopedia called Monitor, but it came in tiny little bits every Friday over 4 years. So when I turned 11, she made them all into like these books. They were binded with like leather, and I used to make a little house with them. I didn't read them so much. I used them to play like blocks. And that was really exciting. So that was the first place where I migrated. So I migrated from my house, kind of in my mind, to this little space of encyclopedia.
Hello. So my name is Ghayath Almadhoun. I am from Gaza, from Palestine, but I born to a Palestinian father in Damascus, Syria, a Syrian mother, where I ran away from the Syrian regime in 2008. 3 years before the revolution, I was invited to a poetry festival in Sweden, and then I became political refugee. And I'm a Swedish citizen who live in Germany. Not the best place to be as a Palestinian now, because they are not only pro-Israel, they already also silent the Palestinian. They canceled every event and book release and exhibition and poetry reading or showing film to any Palestinian or any Jewish who support Palestine or any person who say ceasefire. So it was a relief for me to come to here, running away from this fascist, the new wave of fascists in Germany. In general, I want to say something very important. I really hate categories, and I'm not an immigrant writer. I'm a writer. I write many books before I became immigrated to Sweden. And I don't think it's important in any way in the career of the writer. The writer is a writer. If he forced to leave his country because of a dictatorship, that is something political of his life. But in general, immigration is very important for me, and I see it as a method for writing. I see the exile and the immigration, and to be refugee, to be displaced from your place. I was displaced twice. One I didn't choose because I born in a refugee camp because of the occupation. And then one I choose to run away, searching for the freedom as a writer to run away from Syria. This is very important, and because that I accept to participate in this event, because the immigration in this sense, it's make you an outsider, it make you a foreigner who could see the things from different angle. You could, it's very important for literature, and we can't even imagine the history of literature without the immigration. You can't imagine Hannah Arendt or Edward Said or anyone from the people who ran away from the Nazis or like this without thinking about immigration and like this. So from this sense, like I think it's important. Outside that, it's another private life only. Yeah.
Okay, could you tell us about some of your works? And they work across genres, but also across, Luna, for example, works with sound, with film, with so many other things. So let's just listen about their works.
Thank you. So I work in prose. I'm a novelist. Primarily contemporary fiction. As you mentioned, Someday Maybe was my debut novel out at the end of 2022, and that deals with grief. It also encapsulates some of the profound Igbo customs surrounding grief and just in general as well. We mourn in a very specific way in our culture, and it involves burial rites. It involves, for instance, widows in our custom shave their heads when their husbands die. And I had made it a key point of mine to make sure that, being an immigrant myself to the UK, that none of my heritage is lost within my writing. I bring it to the forefront of all of my writing and make sure that I do my best to explain, while not watering down, what the immigrant and the Igbo experience means for me and my family as well. My second novel, Allow Me to Introduce Myself, is out in May of this year, and that deals specifically with the culture of social media and how that has an impact on children who are brought up in the spotlight of social media. It examines themes of autonomy, of consent, and again, it centers on an Igbo woman and how she was raised by somebody who wasn't Igbo, and how that informs her perspective and also how she feels about being raised in the spotlight as well. I always write about things that are dear to me or that are important to me, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So, yeah.
Okay, so I write poetry, but we write collaboratively with Adrian Fisher that is over there, and we also make film, and we explore ideas of locality, of like where the spaces where we are with and actually away from countries. Obviously, you're always traveling to a country, but and then we're into filling the space and collaborating with people, but also maybe looking for a balance between the politic and the poetic. And we have like a tiny poem. It's only 1 minute. Do you want to come over? It's maybe more like an action. And well, so I am a migrant. I also grew up in Chile with dictatorship all my entire growing up. But then it was strange because I never knew anything different. So it seemed like that's the way you live or something. That's why the books, to make a little house of books, was kind of refreshing or nice, like you have somewhere nice to go. No. So we were thinking of all the processes that you have to go through when you are an immigrant, and all the bureaucracy and all these lines and all these, papers. And this poem is called We Are All Immigrants.
So in 2007, I decided something very strange. I was very young and optimistic in that time. So I decided that I will stop doing anything. I say, why every writer or every person in the world do his job? Like the doctor is a doctor, the butcher is a butcher is the person who sell vegetables, sell weapons, and the poet should do something else to survive economically. So in 2007, I decided that I will write only poetry, even if I will starve to death. And I was very stubborn that I succeed to do it until now. So I do nothing else. I don't write articles, critique like most of the people, essays. I don't do anything else. And I succeed for these 16, 17 years until the Hamas attacked Israel. And after that, the boycott happened. And from the 7th of October until now, I didn't got any invitation, any participate in any anthology, reading anything. I don't know how it is, it will end, but now I'm living from my saving. And I began to see the things from a different way because it shakes the democracy that I believe in and freedom of speech. When I see that I live in a country now where I pay my tax, but that, yes, there is freedom of speech, but is to who? Like there's, it's like there's some people have the freedom of speech and some people not. Now we have more than 1,000 cases of cancellation in 3 months. So it's beyond the imagination. If we continue like this in 1 or 2 months, we will pass the cancellation of the Crystal Night of November 38. It's really scary what's going on. And the cancellation is not only to Palestinian. Most of, like 50% of the cancellation happened to Jewish people who say only ceasefire, like not even that. So in this new environment, I began to think of, see myself as a poet in a different way, because I hate so much to be activist. One of the most things I hate in my life is activism. And I find myself sitting here speaking about political stuff, which I am very political, but not like in a different way. But I felt like I am in a very new era of my life. And I really like feel that what will happen after will lead our countries for years, because if you shake the democracy, and I speak here in India, it's the biggest democracy in the world. So like if this shaked, and I need to live again because I already left for freedom, and now I find myself in a place. I was the first person cancelled in Germany 1 day before Adania Shibli. So I find myself in the situation I ran away from 17 years ago, and now I need to run away, but to where? So I did apply for the lottery, the green card lottery of America. It's the only choice, I don't know. So yes, it's as we say in Arabic, شر البلية ما يضحك. The most funny things make, like the most difficult things make you laugh, you understand? So this is my work right now.
Because of the difference in the genre and the type and modes and of their work, I have to sort of individually sort of ask some of the questions sometimes. So with Onyi, I'd like to particularly ask you about your characters, particularly the female characters. So could you sort of tell us more about them? Because the protagonist, right? So
with regards to my female characters, I know with most writers, the assumption is, and I think it's a fair assumption to make, that elements of either yourself as the writer or people that you know or have experienced in life find their way into your characters in some way, shape, or form. They may not be wholly based on one person, but they could be an amalgamation of all the people that you've encountered and of yourself as well. I think that is true for me, and especially the way that I for my female characters. I come from a family of extremely strong women that have taught me how to be strong, but also how to leave room to fall apart and to rebuild yourself into whatever way that you need to, depending on your circumstances. Immigrating from Nigeria to the UK, where I wouldn't call it particularly overtly hostile, but it hasn't changed to this day. especially now that you see today in the UK, our immigration policy is particularly difficult. We have politicians openly referring to immigrants in derogatory ways, you know, trying to cancel boats, migrant boats arriving, trying to enact this Rwanda policy and so on and so forth. It is hostile, but not in a way that would be perhaps described as overt to many other Western countries. And when I arrived in the UK with my family, there were several times where we were given our indefinite leave to remain was dangled in front of us, kind of like a carrot, and then revoked at the last minute. There were several times when my parents received letters, told us that we needed to leave the country within the week. It was all kinds of things. We were young then, but it was all kinds of these things that stay with you. You see the turmoil, you see the stress that it's inflicted on you and your family, and that informs how I shape not just my female characters, but all my characters. But the women that I write are always complex. They are not stereotypical, but they are complex characters. There's no one way to express womanhood, and there's no one way to express being an immigrant or an Igbo woman. So I write, and I make sure that I fall in love with my characters. I let them speak through me. I don't see myself as creating them. I am just a mouthpiece or a vessel to express what my characters want me or need me to express. They each have distinct personalities. They each have their own profiles. And I know how they come to life for me is often when I'm asleep, they will speak to me and we will hold conversations in my dreams, and I will make sure that I record those conversations and bring them to the page. So yeah, all my characters, they are dear to me, and it is very interesting and sometimes funny to see how others react to the characters that you know intimately and in a lot of ways love. Lots of people don't like the characters they create, so yeah.
You've also lived in so many different places within the UK, right?
Yeah.
Like Isle of Man,
Yeah.
Newcastle. And
Yeah.
so how has living in different places informed the setting or the characters, perspectives?
Absolutely. So I live in London at the moment, and I have lived in London for a long, long time now. London is the most diverse place that I have ever lived. There's so many different cultures, races, creeds, beliefs, faiths, all a big melting pot in London, right? And that is completely the opposite of everywhere else I've lived within the UK. When we first left Nigeria, we went to Glasgow, which is in Scotland, and even from Glasgow to the Isle of Man, even to Newcastle, me and my brother and my sister were the only black children in the schools that we went to. We experienced intense bullying in all of those schools that we went to, even within the even on the Isle of Man, which is a very small island. When we lived there, we were the only black family on the entire island. So there's a balance that you have to kind of maintain or try and get right with between remaining authentic to your culture and your heritage and the assimilation that is expected of us as immigrants, which, you know, at this stage I wholeheartedly reject. I am who I am. So yeah, that's
With Luna, so Luna works across, she works with text, with sound, with drawing, installations, films, and she also plays in an experimental band. She's also into handmade publishing press. She's got a handmade publishing press. She's also interested in like other things like ritual, presence, locality, and collaborative performance in particular. I think you also said about collaborative authorship. So now you can see the panel also has, writers with, or sort of authors and creative artists with different interests. So could you sort of talk us through some of your experiences or projects or, experience of working with different modes?
Yeah. Hello? Yeah. I just wanted to say that migration, in a way, is kind of very similar to poetry. I mean, from the migros, the migrare, migration is actually change. The original, that's what it means. It means change and movement. And I see poetry kind of exactly in that way, as something that is moving and that is changing and that is somehow alive. And I don't see kind of poetry as something that it has a limit. So when you say that I go into all these other things, for me, in a way, those things are one thing. And this is, in a way, the way we live somehow. And then there is this moving between the image to the sound, to the film, to a word, to a musical note. But at the end, I see all that somehow as poetry, or as migration. Maybe you're constantly migrating within those fields and within space. And then one project. For example, we did a project that we followed a river. So it was the Rhone River. So we went from the glacier tongue to, to where the river went. And what we did for that was to basically see all the things that the river fed, but also like start from the tongue. It's funny how the river also has all these body parts inside. So you have the tongue, you have the arms, and then we saw that the river was taken for industry. So different industries will pollute, for example, and create different objects from it and do logging. But then it was also lots of people that collected all the mushrooms that grew by the river. And then we recorded the river, like within the water from the outside. And then we wrote about the river. And we looked at it like for a couple of months. And then what we built with that was this kind of visual scores. So they're kind of visual poems, but that they can be interpreted in many ways. So, for example, we invited musicians to play these scores that can be notations mixed with like some images of the mushrooms, mixed with like some beings that live in the river, maybe some stones that were by the river. And with that we made a film, like kind of an experimental film. But what was really beautiful is the way that you make these kind of visual poems, but then every different musician, for example, or every different people that we played with in relation to this work will redo it again. And I think this idea of like a movement and change within the work is like something that is exciting for me, and I think is alive, and that's it.
Ghayath, I read in sort of one of the reviews about your movement across cities and your fascination for cities in particular. And how has this sort of reflected in your works?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is really my work in a way related to, if I can call it experimental traveling. First of all, I born to a group of Palestinians who arrived to Syria in 1967 war. So the majority of Palestinian refugees in Syria, they came in 1948 and they have Palestinian Syrian passport. We were not only stateless like the rest of Palestinians, the 15 million Palestinians, we were paperless. The people who came from Gaza and West Bank after the war of 1967, we were paperless. So I spent 30 years of my life, I didn't have any paper, so I couldn't travel. And I was fascinated by the Quran, and there is part in the Quran is called Surah Al-Shu'ara, the poetry section. And in the end of it, it's have a line where it say, Alam tara annahum fi kulli wadin yahimun. Don't you see they are traveling everywhere? And I was dreaming all my life to be a poet so I can travel, and I have no paper at all. So when I escaped Syria, and I got the ID from the Immigration Board in Sweden in 2008. That was the first paper, official paper I got in my life. And then I began to travel like hell to cover all the 30 years where I was no paper to travel. So I really travel, but that is not connected in a way to my work. I can give you example of what I do. So for example, in 2012, Assad regime attacked the suburb of Damascus by chemical gas. The sarin gas is a kind of gas from the VX family, and he killed around 1,400 civilians. I was shocked by the images of the chemical, how the people were shaking, and I began to think about the chemical gas itself. And because of that, I began to read, and I find that the first chemical attack happened in history, happened in Belgium, in the Flanders fields, in the 22nd of April 1915. So in the 22nd of April 2015, 100 years exact, the date after 100 years, I went to Ypres, where the city that happened the attack. I stayed for 2 weeks. I visited 170 cemetery. 600,000 grave. I visited them all. And then I wrote text called Schizophrenia. The people, my friend, they thought I'm crazy totally. They told me there's no need to visit 600,000 grave for people who got killed 100 years ago to write text about a chemical attack. But for me, this is writing. Because the text I wrote in my imagination will be totally different without this visit. And I wrote this text, I call it Schizophrenia, because it's moved between Palestine, which is my dream, Syria, where is my fact and reality that happening now, Ypres, the horror happened in the past, and Stockholm, the most peaceful place in the world where I was living in that time. So it's moved as a zigzag with these things. It's a very long text. Also, I write in this way in every text I do. I make visit, trip, touch the things, do it. And you know, as a poet, we are very individual. We are very selfish in this sense. We always go to our inner scene, because in the end we see the world as we see it is as a reflection of our memories, a reflection of our experience, but it's a broken mirror. So you don't got the real reflection. It's a mix between dreams and nightmares. And because that, I always say my poetry is a love poetry, but in the shape of nightmares, because my dictionary and my memories and my life is having the background of two big wars, like two big countries, one of them under occupation called Palestine, and one of them under dictatorship, which is bombing the country for years, it's called Syria. So I reflect that, but my intention is really only so simple, to write a love poem. I tried to do this for 30 years and I didn't succeed until now. I swear.
Would you like to read your poem now?
Yeah, can I sit here and while I read it? Yes. So I will read from my third book, and thank you, because you will read the English translation from my book Adrenaline, which exists here in the bookstore. It's page 12, I think. Okay, short poem. This poem I wrote in 2008, when Israel was attacking Gaza. In that time, it was the first 2 months for me in Europe, and I was witnessing the attack on Gaza from the European perspective, where they didn't show anything. In Israel in that time killed 1,400 civilians, 900 of them were women and children. And then I find that some media was showing these photos, and it was disturbing the white people I know. So it was disturbing their way of thinking, so they prefer to not see it. So yeah. نحن المتناثرين شظايا الممطرين لحما نتقدم بالاعتذار الشديد من هذا العالم المتحضر فردا فردا رجالا ونساء وأطفالا لأننا وبدون قصد منا ظهرنا في منازلهم الآمنة بلا استئذان نعتذر لانطباع أشلائنا في ذاكرتهم البيضاء كالثلج ولأننا خدشنا صورة الإنسان الطبيعي الكامل في أعينهم لأننا وبكل وقاحة قفزنا فجأة على نشرات الأخبار وصفحات الإنترنت والجرائد عاريين إلا من دمائنا وبقايا أجسادنا المتفحمة نعتذر من كل العيون التي لم تجرؤ أن تنظر في جراحنا مباشرة لكي لا تصاب بالقشعريرة ونعتذر من كل من لم يستطع إكمال وجبة العشاء بعد أن فاجأته صورنا طازجة على التلفزيون نعتذر عن الآلام التي سببناها لكل من رآنا هكذا بلا تجميل أو تقطيب أو إعادة جمع لبقايانا وقطعنا قبل أن نظهر في الشاشات ونعتذر أيضا من الجنود الإسرائيليين الذين تكلفوا عناء الضغط على الأزرار في طائراتهم ودباباتهم لتحويلنا إلى قطع نعتذر منهم عن الصور البشعة التي تحولنا إليها بعد أن صوبوا قنابلهم مباشرة إلى رؤوسنا الطرية وعلى الساعات التي سيقضونها الآن في عيادات الأطباء النفسيين ليعودوا بشرا كما كانوا قبل تحويلنا إلى أشلاء مقززة تلاحقهم كلما حاولوا النوم نحن الأشياء التي رأيتموها على الشاشات والصحف والتي إن اجتهدتم في جمع بقاياها كلعبة البازل فإنكم ستفوزون بصورة واضحة لنا، واضحة لدرجة أنكم لن تستطيعوا أن تفعلوا شيئا.
Now I'll read the English translation of this poem. It's titled We. We who are strewn about in fragments, whose flesh flies through the air like raindrops, offer our profound apologies to everyone in the civilized world, men, women, and children, because we have unintentionally appeared in their peaceful homes without asking permission. We apologize for stamping our severed body parts into their snow white memory, because we have violated the image of the normal, whole human being in their eyes, because we've had the impertinence to leap suddenly onto news bulletins and the pages of the internet and the press, naked except for our blood and charred remains. We apologize to all those who did not have the courage to look directly at our injuries for fear they would be too horrified, and to those unable to finish their evening meals after they had unexpectedly seen fresh images of us on television. We apologize for the suffering we caused to all who saw us like that, unembellished, with no attempt having been made to put us back together or reassemble our remains before we appeared on their screens. We also apologize to the Israeli soldiers who took the trouble to press the buttons in their aircraft and tanks to blow us to pieces. And we are sorry for how hideous we looked after they aimed their shells and bombs straight at our soft heads, and for the hours they are now going to spend in psychiatrist clinics trying to become human again, like they were before our transformation into repulsive body parts that pursue them whenever they try to sleep. We are the things you have seen on your screens and in the press. And if you made an effort to fit the pieces together like a jigsaw, you would get a clear picture of us, so clear that you would be unable to do a thing. Thank you. It's a very moving poem, and it's got such a collective, it's got a very strong articulation of that sort of, that sort of situation, things were sort of left unaddressed, and there's that sort of insensitivity about that sort of state of stupor. So I think it's a very, very, very powerful poem. Now, only coming back to your book in particular, and I have, you could sort of think about any of your books, but for now, I'm just thinking about Eve and the way you have arranged the chapters, but also sometimes your soliloquies, for example, right? So I'd like to sort of, also sometimes the narrative shifting from I to the second person you, right? So these are very interesting, textual attributes. So could you sort of tell me more about it?
Yeah, so the way I wrote Eve and the way I wrote grief in this book was supposed to be as authentic and visceral as possible. I was just speaking to my friend and colleague Troy earlier, and we were discussing grief in our writing and how, unfortunately, our society still shies away from authentic expressions of grief. It's terrifying to us. It's unsavory when to see people breaking down. It's even, as Ghayath has mentioned, as we're seeing the photos and the images coming out of Gaza, and how the grief being expressed by people that are left behind, and it's people are confronted with that, and they're able to turn off their screens. They're able to step back and move away from that because it's uncomfortable. They don't like to look at it head on. And it's the same thing with all kinds of measures of grief. The way I wrote Eve, I chose to write in first person because that's as close to reality as you can get. Me, this is what I'm feeling. This is how I choose to express it. But also, when I switch to second person and take a slight step back from it, it's to allow the reader to take a breather and to also think about how they would feel in that situation as well. And these are very important to me because, you know, a lot of feedback that I've had about Someday Maybe, lots of people love it. A lot of people are like, it's too heavy, it's too depressing. And I'm like, well, we're not used to having to sit with and contend with our grief and the discomfort of our grief and other people's grief for any extended period of time, despite it not being smaller, despite it not becoming easier, as it were. We build ourselves up around grief and we reshape ourselves as a result of the grief and of the joy and all the life experiences and emotions that we experience, right? So I understand why people are uncomfortable with the book in certain ways, but it's not enough that I would not write the same kind of thing again. Yeah.
Luna, I want to particularly ask you about the collaborative performance and the collaborative writing, because when we spoke earlier, you were talking about you write one word, and so how relevant is that to the? I was also thinking about the sort of theme of immigrant writing and so on and so forth. Well, it's two people having gone to or inhabited different places and countries and perspectives coming together in a different way. So how relevant is that sort of collaborative aspect of your works? Could you comment on that?
It's really exciting writing with other people. For me, for us, it's exciting because often writing is seen as something very solitary, and I think it is, and I think it's maybe not for everybody, but for me, it makes me very happy in a way, or it's satisfying, or it's exciting to write with another person. Also because I think a big component of something that is poetic for me is the unexpectedness. So when something is unexpected, somehow it moves something in your head. So when you're writing with another person, and we do it quite fast, so we write a line and then another one or two, or sometimes three, or sometimes we're very stuck and we write just like one word or two, and then we move it around. And then obviously then we edit it and we change it, but it's something that it kind of grows. And we have been sharing this experience with other poets here, like Juana and Justin that are over there. So we've been trying to also write collectively as a group. It's actually an experience that we enjoy a lot, but we also like doing it with other people. Sometimes not only with words. We live in London and we have a small kitchen, and we do kitchen sessions. So it's not very big, but we can invite like a small group of people, and we kind of write together, but then we put sound to it. So we might make it into a song or into a weird noise, and anybody can bring whatever they want. And it's not only poets. So we invite poets, musicians, actors, or just different friends that want to think of like, how do you do something collectively? I also cook some lovely food for it. Have some wine as well.
I hope I can join her. She lives in London too, so next time.
Great.
Yeah. Ghayath, I think, you did tell me that you write in Arabic, but your work has been translated into so many different languages. It's also been taken up by artists, and so you've also explored sort of the multimedia possibilities of poetry. So what has it been like to work with other artists who has taken up your work?
Yeah, I really hate artists so much. But I always remember that I hate writers more, so I feel good. Yeah, so yeah, seriously, this is really true. No, with artists, I have a lot of work with artists, but I never work with them. So I it's happened, it's like this. Like, for example, with Jenny Holzer, she was projecting my poetry in different cities, but I was not involved. And once they show it in Aarhus, not far away from Sweden, but I felt shy to go from Sweden to see my poem projected in the facade of the museum with each word bigger than a bus, and I say, what's the meaning to go and see my poetry? So I didn't go, I felt shy to go. And like with other, for example, Blixa, he was reading the poems, but I didn't even went with them. They were in Athens and in where city, Stavanger in Norway, there were 65 orchestra people, and I felt like, why I should go and listen to my poetry? So I never work with them. They find my poems, they do art, I'm okay with that. I got money, that's good. Yeah, so yeah, but no, I do poetry films. I did with Marie Silkebari, which also we wrote book together. She's a Swedish writer. I'm Arabic writer. We are from different generation, from different background. But in 2014, we got a book together called Till Damascus. And I wrote my text in Arabic. She wrote her text in Swedish. And through workshop, we translate my text and the book came out. And we did several poetry films. And actually, we got many prizes as filmmakers, but poetry film, you know, and it's a very weird thing. It's similar to art film, where you mix a poem with something. In 2020, I win the best film prize for Zebra Poetry Film Festival, and guess what? There were 100 country, 2,000 film in the competition. I won the prize. I said, what's going on? What's wrong in this world? Anyway, so I got the prize. I spent the money in good way, I promise. So yes, in general, I do like to collaborate with other people. But when it's about poetry, it is, I like the way of the rewriting. And this is something really individual. So you sit with people, you work on a text, and like this. In the moment you want to rewrite your text, and here is the poetry for me, because I born as a poet. I was able to say the Arabic sonnets, the classic verses of Arabic, anytime until now. I have this Bedouin inside me. I'm able to say poetry in any time with rhyming. But I decided when I began to publish poetry that no, that is for joy. This is, I spend it with my friend, make some songs, lyric, and we play it on oud, and we have fun. But writing, I'm a very postmodern writer. I rewrite, and I use a lot of copy-paste because I stopped writing with paper anymore. So I make copy-paste and take this up and do that and rewrite. And then I do two things, and they are very important for me. In shortly, one I call deleting, and one I call erasing. So deleting, after I write the text, I leave it for a couple of weeks, I go back to it, and I find that some part of it, they are not fitting in the text. I delete them. By meaning, I take them to another file. Either I will rewrite them in a new poem, or I add them to another poem. This is deleting. It's have no joy. And then you have the erasing, and it's have a very joyful moment because it's have destruction, where I erase the part and it's not exist anymore. And this is really interesting because you got addicted to it. You understand me? It's have a dopamine in it. And after I make deleting and erasing, I began to rewrite, and the poem shrink and shrink and shrink. And my publisher always angry, like, what's going on with the book? Is from 100 page to 80 to 75. So it's really interesting. So this way of work, it's really, you need to be individual, you need to be selfish. You could do it in a cafe or in a noisy place or above the ocean in a plane, but you should be close to yourself.
I have one more question, but then depending on how many people are eager to ask questions, we can skip it or not. Could we sort of start, could you start thinking about your questions and perhaps start asking them? How many of you have questions? Could we see like a quick show of hands? Okay, you've got one, we've got one. Anyone else? Shall we take their questions? And if we have more time, we can go back to, the one I have.
Thank you so much for this. It's just wonderful listening to all of you speak about your immigrant experience and how it feeds into your work and into your process. My question is about language, and to be an immigrant is to exist in a liminal space, and that kind of liminality takes away some of your language. And how do you navigate that in your work? How do you bring that kind of liminality into your text for all three of you? Thank you.
Well, actually, my native tongue is Spanish, but then it's the English, and I actually love writing in English. Even though when I liked it the most is when I knew very little. So I knew very few words, and I spoke terribly. I mean, I still, well, whatever, I struggle. But yeah, so that was very exciting somehow, because it really restricted what I could say. But also I could say things in a way that I would never say in Spanish. So then what I did is I translated them back to Spanish, and I found them really weird. But then I find some kind of freedom in writing in English. But then you were saying before about what has inspired you. And when we started to work together, we were looking at indigenous tribes that live in the very bottom of Chile, in Patagonia. So there were people that lived there for 10,000 years, and they were genocided so recently. It's a shame. It's like so awful. I mean, the Spaniards come and colonized 500 years ago, but then these people lived 10,000 years there. So I was really interested in some of their dead languages. And I just like how, I don't know, it's nobody to talk with in these languages, but I find that there is a strength in naming those words. So some poems were weaving these languages, the English and the Spanish, and some of these words that are kind of lost, but I feel they're not lost somehow, that there is a feeling, or there is something when you rename them in naming.
I say something? Yeah. So yeah, I came from the lucky languages, and they are, I think, 4 languages what we consider to be lucky: the Spanish, English, French, and Arabic, because each of them have more than 20 countries. So you have Urdu, you have Hindi, you have Mandarin. It's a huge, it's one of the biggest languages, but it's mostly related to one country. Even if you have different region, with our, as Arab or Spanish or French or English, the main things for this language, that it is the same language, but 22 different culture. So Saudi Arabia is different than Morocco, Morocco different than Syria, Syria then different than Sudan. So they hate you in Iraq, you are bestseller in Egypt, they write against you in Lebanon, you are invited to Morocco, like you got a prize in Yemen. It's really chaos, and I love it so much. And you could travel from book fair to book fair in a very systematic way. They cover the whole year, enjoying your time, having good food, and your Swedish friends are so jealous because they have only 9 million people, one book fair. So this is really joyful. But the Arabic language is a very strong, if I can use this word, it have a lot of power, because it was the language of the biggest empire in history. It was 3 times the empire bigger than the Roman Empire. It was from Spain to the borders of China. And it's lead the world for 1,000 years, so it's the longest period in history. And because of the Quran, is the it became a holy language. So it have a lot of power, and this power is very dangerous, because power, it's mean patriarchy. It's mean more metaphors, more symbols to hide in, and it's so tricky because it have a lot of words. It's much bigger than any language you could imagine. We have millions of words. So all this together, when you find yourself in not in your society, there is a big chance that you will shrink and be in a cocoon. So you will be more related to the Arabic language than when you are in the Arabic country. And this has become very dangerous. I tried my best to be clear with my Arabic, as my English translator say, that she began to understand my Arabic, because each one of us have his own languages, you know, and take time. So I try my best to not use metaphors, to not use symbols, especially after I left the dictatorship, because that you use it more in a dictatorship, and try to not be patriarchal in my language. For example, I'm sorry to say this, but I feel that when I'm in England, there is more patriarchal word in their English than compare when I am in New York or in America, even if it's the same language. This is what I try to say. So it's always you should choose your own languages. Doesn't matter where you are.
I'll try and be very brief with mine. So Igbo is I don't want to call it a dying language, but it is very specific to one ethnicity within Nigeria, and Nigeria's main language now is English, as you're probably aware. colonization, etc., etc. And I make sure in all of my work that I insert Igbo language. And because it's not very widely known outside of our ethnicity and outside of the Nigerian or specifically Igbo diaspora, it can be a bit jarring. And I do get, sometimes I get pushback, people not really understanding what I'm trying to say and so on and so forth. But that's why it's even more important to me. There's certain phrases and certain terms in the Igbo language and in any language that's not English, where there's not a direct translation. I'll give you an example. In Igbo, we say ndo, and ndo, I get very loosely translated, means it's an expression of condolence or, oh, I'm sorry you're feeling that way. But to the closest translation for ndo in English is, I am feeling with you. I am experiencing your pain, your grief, whatever it is, at the same time as you, and I'm there for you and living it with you. And it's for those reasons that I make sure that it's something that I want to maintain in all of my work and make sure that it lives on through my work. Simply because I feel like it's shrinking more and more, and it's part of me and part of my culture and heritage to make sure that I keep that vein of language living through my work. So.
When I heard your question, I was also thinking, were you thinking of linguistic alienation or something as well? Right? Yeah? Yeah, well, I did think about it, like as in, you're going to a new place and then you're thinking about, maybe you're listening to your songs from back home, or, thinking about something, or thinking about a food, or you're trying to describe something to someone there, but then you can't really express it in the other, and there comes a frustration about it, right? Especially when your works get translated, this raises very interesting questions as well. So that was a brilliant question. Thank you for that. Does anyone else have questions?
So, so when you are away from home, and there is a lot of problems happening in your home, so you are in a situation where the surrounding seems to be peaceful, but it's so hard inside you. It's agonizing. The home that you came from was burning. So how do you express it? How do you manage to express that feeling of agony in peace? And let me add on one more question. So all three of you were embracing your cultural background and talking a lot about it, but there would be a lot of part of it which may not be ideal for this particular societal setup. And how do you grow over it, and how do you embrace the good in it? Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. It's really the question have a lot of layers on it, but the most important thing that for me, it's not to fall on the victimhood thing. Like, and this is honestly, I, as a Palestinian, when I born in Syria, I never in my life felt victim. Actually, if I have a time machine, I will repeat myself as it is. It was a really wonderful life. And I never met any Palestinian, at least from my experience, and I met thousands of them, I promise. I never met any Palestinian who feel victim. We are very proud people, came from proud culture. In the same time, it is very important that we should gain equal rights, for sure. For our meeting with the others, it's very problematic for them, not for us, because no one have freedom unless everyone have freedom. No one have rights unless everyone have rights. So if you are born a stateless, because the white European people were killing the Jewish for hundreds of years, ended in a final solution, and we as a Palestinian, we pay our land for the white European supremacy who were killing the Jewish, so they run away to be saved from the Holocaust, and they come to my country. So we pay the bill of the European racism. So they should feel not relax in front of us. every time they meet us, they remember what they did to the Jewish, and they remember that there is called a Palestinian question because of them. This is in the general scene. In the private scene, I remember my mother is Syrian, and I lost my brother, got killed by Assad regime bombing in 2016. When Dar'a was under the siege by the Syrian regime, and my mother was thirsty because there is no water. In that time, I was living in Stockholm, in Sweden, where there is 280,000 lake of drinking water. I was enjoying the best quality of water in the planet in Sweden, and I was not able to drink it because my mother was thirsty under a siege and a bombing from the government. And this kind of paradox, I don't know how to describe it without being insane, but this is the most important for me, how I see myself and my family. The others, he have his own problem, you understand me? If I could continue answering your question, it have many layers actually, forever, but like we don't have the time.
Yeah, I feel very, well, it's totally different situation, but I feel close to that in a way that, yeah, if you grew up in a dictatorship, you don't feel a victim, you're just growing up there and things are happening all the time around you. And then, yes, some things are more like a limit and you don't have freedom of assembly and you cannot meet at night. And I don't know, when I traveled for first time, it was weird, like I never went to a concert, for example, and all these like normal things that people will find really normal to do. But yeah, at the same time, it didn't matter. It was only with the distance and with other people that you realize the things that you didn't do or didn't happen. Also that you were lucky that you were not killed or whatever, but yes, so that's good. But then I was thinking, you were saying about the language, and then, yeah, and what is language and how do you inhabit a language and what are the limits of that language? It's so complex, like you're saying, like we all agree on certain words. We're discussing this, so we can say sadness or love or these like big words, but actually they have such a different meaning for everyone that it seems kind of incredible that we agree to name them in one way. It's like really odd. And then just the last thing is like, yeah, one thing is the meaning and the narrative, and I love like reading novels and reading, like these strong meanings and messages, but I also really, really love to get away from meaning and to make noises, for example. So to chant or to be with a group of people and make together a letter like ah, or to, to make a noise, to try to talk with a bird. And I think like, yeah, I love words, but I also love the non-word space, and I think we work a lot into that, and we try to find spaces where you can still communicate with something sonic that can, because it still resonates in everybody's body. So I think you still have a very strong connection, even without the words.
I'll just quickly round off. So in terms of maintaining that thread to home when you're living outside of your home, and obviously you mentioned turmoil in your home country. So similarly, again, as Ghayath has mentioned, you work to get to where you are, and nobody can take that away from you. But where you are is also a very accident of your birth that you had no control over, right? And in order to fully maintain a connection with home, you have to acknowledge that and you have to sit with it. So when you're witnessing atrocities happening back home, when you're witnessing political unrest, when you're witnessing something like NSARS and you see the young people of your country being slaughtered in broad daylight and it being captured on film, and you're sitting in your comfortable house or your flat in London and feeling absolutely powerless to do anything about it, it's those moments where I actually feel most connected with home, because you're united in your powerlessness, right? You might have worked all your way to London and you're in a prestigious job and you're getting your book published and so on, and you're living a fantastic life, but none of that means anything because you are powerless to stop what is happening at home. You have to sit in the same pain and the same grief as the people back home, your relatives, your friends, the people that are still there living it every single day. And that's important to me. It's why I was so very, again, to bring up, just very briefly bringing up the NSARS movement, I was very vocal and very clear about uplifting the voices from back home, because it was, again, it was like a media blackout. Our government was telling us that it wasn't happening and we shouldn't believe our own eyes. And I was like, no, actually, what I can do, since I cannot be censored from where I am, I will make sure that the very least I can do is make sure that the rest of the world can see what is happening. So it cannot be denied. History will be recorded one way or the other, and that's how I maintain in the joy. Obviously, it's not just all pain. There's lots of joyous things that come out of home as well, and living and being part of the diaspora is a privilege, but at the same time, you must make sure that you stay connected via pain and also via sadness and grief as well.
So that brings us, wow. So that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you so much, all the speakers, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. Thank you so much again, and have a lovely evening.